see an author at like a writing event who had a t-shirt on, and he was like, creativity is like a fart. If you have to push it, it's probably crap. And I just think about that all the time.
Behind every creative person or small business is a great story waiting to be told.
And we are here to tell them.
I'm Shane, aspiring author and man behind I-Endeavour.
I'm Hannah, semi-abstract artist and woman behind Sarah's Studio. And this is the
I-Endeavour podcast.
Welcome back to the I-Endeavour podcast. We're here today with Naomi Kelly. Hello.
Hey.
Hi, how are you? Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome.
Why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and what it is you do?
So my name's Naomi, and I'm a young adult fantasy author who's independently published. I'm living in Dublin, Ireland at the moment. And my books are primarily kind of magic, fantasy, and a strong female role base. They're kind of the main genre that I do, and tropes and things like that. My writing started in 2019 with Trial by Obsidian, and then last year and this year I've been working on the Siren stories. So they're 2 books, and they're both out now.
Brilliant. And one of them came out very recently, didn't it?
Yeah, it came out like 2 weeks ago, so it's very new. Yeah.
And has writing always been a career path you wanted to go down, or was it just something you did as a hobby that's now kind of taken off?
Yeah, definitely the latter. Like, I never planned on doing writing kind of as more of a kind of a career. It was something I did as a hobby, and I started off more with screenwriting and script writing kind of for school. So in 4th year you always do a big play, and ours was Grease Lightning with a twist, and it was terrible and cringy, and there was Nicki Minaj singing and everything. But I started getting into theatre groups then, and like little Saturday acting schools and groups like that, and part of it was having to write little short stories or screenplays. So that's where I got into the sense of dialogue. That's why a lot of my books are dialogue heavy, because it's kind of a back and forth more so than extensive world building. So that's kind of where my interest started. And then I went through a phase of really embarrassing Twilight fan fiction for about a year. And that's kind of when I started like writing books and, you know, longer pieces of writing that had to have other characters, and kind of just grew from there. A lot of people ask me like, oh, well, like, what was the big factor that made you write your first book? I don't really know. I just started writing one day, and then a couple of months later I had a book finished and was like, what do I do now? I started going to like self-publishing talks or literary festivals and meeting different people. And I just kind of decided to self-publish it then, and that was 2019, and I've just been doing it ever since.
That's cool.
Sum up.
So could you sum up kind of what it is you do in 5 words?
Books about myths and magic. pretty much
Nice.
it. Yeah, all of them have that. Even though they're different, they all have myths and magic.
It's one of those questions we always ask as well, and it throws everybody because there's such a
the
put under
writers
pressure.
seem to be the ones that can be concise about it.
Yeah, the writers
The
are the
more
best.
creative people like myself are like,
So what was your earliest memory then of writing? Obviously you're saying you only started fairly recently. Did you do any writing kind of before then, like at school or?
Like I did honours English, say for junior cert, leaving cert, and things like that, and you always had to write creative stories and stuff, but that was always, I think I have like a very mild rebellious streak where if I have to do something for someone else, I'm like, I didn't really like it. So like my English teacher, if she saw me writing books, she'd probably be astounded because I never did the poetry and I never answered the questions, things like that. But I think if it's me just tipping away at it myself, I probably started writing small stories when I was like 5 or 6. Just, you know, I loved what was it called? Stargate. It's like a really sci-fi show from the 90s, and I used to always write little episodes about like what I thought would happen if you went through the wormhole and stuff like that, and then force my parents to read them. But yeah, I didn't actually get like creative into it and taking it more seriously until I was older, which like is a little bit of a shame because I probably would have had loads of support in school if I had just done my homework and appreciated it more. You know, my teachers were fantastic. They would have guided me, but I I was too stubborn and didn't get into it until it was later and I was finished with school and everything.
It's funny, you're not the first person as well to say they have a rebellious streak. We've had a few people.
Got a few criminals on as well.
Yeah.
I'm actually like very like reserved and shy, but I think when it comes to like doing schoolwork and stuff, I was like, "Ooh, I'm not writing a 5-page essay." Like, no, I'm not doing my homework. But I actually probably would have loved it. Like, I just didn't want to do it at the time.
We've had a few people on that when we ask, you know, what would you do if you weren't doing what you're doing currently? They're like, "Oh, I'd be in prison."
Yeah.
They're honest.
We'll come back to that question shortly and see how you answer it. But
was there a person or was there an event or like what was your kind of inspiration or like what kicked off you starting writing?
I think an event that was like really impactful was the Cork Book Literary Fair. I think it's next week actually. It's like an annual thing that happens in April. And it popped up on my Facebook as a suggested ad, and it was one of the few times that actually turned out to be quite useful. They had publishers and editors in the local library just giving talks about, you know, how to get an agent, how to start querying, things like that. And I was very new in the writing process. You know, I hadn't even really told a lot of my friends and family that I was considering writing a book at that stage. But I went and I met like a lot of people and heard information.
all right, so why don't you tell us then a bit about something your most recent book or what you're currently working on?
So my most recent book that I published is Kairos, A Siren Story. It came out 2 weeks ago and it's the sequel to Meraki, which is the book I released last May. So they're a duology or a duet, so they go together and they're both out now. The story that I just released, Kairos, follows Ren and Kellen, who are our main two protagonists from the previous book. And it kind of picks up about 3 months after Meraki ends. And it's all about a spring festival and everything's very light and there's loads of blossoms and it's very fresh, and then enemies come creeping in from over the winter time seeking retribution and revenge, and it's how they deal with that and how they juggle their, you know, families and duties whilst trying to plan a future for themselves and discovering if that's even possible when they're so different, because he's a king and she's a siren, which is a type of mermaid. So they're quite different, but they kind of have to find a common ground.
That's very interesting, yeah.
I was just thinking, do you know the way kind of Ireland is steeped in like mythology and interesting kind of like not fairy tales, but you know, that kind of vein of folklore and things. It's really interesting then that like we know so many Irish authors that kind of, you know, take their own adaptations and tap into that history, and it's just really interesting because you don't find that kind of elsewhere. Like you find it kind of in you know, Denmark, like Scandinavian, like they're Norse, and they seem to continue that, and it's the same with us. And maybe like, I don't know about Scotland, I don't know too many Scottish authors, but you don't see it as much in kind of, well, from my experience of reading authors from there, like mainland Europe or the UK. It's just really interesting that now we've spoken to a couple of authors that you know, it seems like you draw from that kind of history. And
I definitely have noticed that a lot of people that grow up with, say, you know, Cuchulainn and the original meanings of Samhain, and like, you know, it's kind of all woven into our education and our culture and things like that, that I think we have a more natural drive for the older myths and you know, but what, you know, the older deities and what causes this spring reaction or what causes winter storms and the old gods. I have noticed that a lot of, you know, Irish authors, or like you said, Scandinavian authors, kind of naturally levitate towards that more so than the more modern Hollywood monsters. You know, they seem to be going back to like the older roots and that style of fantasy. I definitely have noticed that as well.
Yeah, you summed it up a bit more eloquently than me. But it's just, there must be something inherently in us that we're like, you know, we could tap into that root.
It is a really, like, Ireland is steeped in such
Yeah.
cool mythology and folklore that some countries just don't have, I suppose.
Yeah.
Which is a great resource to use.
There's an absolutely amazing bookshop. I'm from the Dingle Peninsula, and there's a amazing bookshop in Dingle, and it's a little Irish one. It has a cafe at the back. They make amazing cakes. But anyway, at the front, it's just all like Irish mythology and Irish speaking, like Irish language books, and books about tourism and things like that. And it's just so nice. Like, I love that shop. I'll have to buy some little books for Donica in there about mythology and stuff. But if I remember, for anyone that's listening, I'll put it on my Instagram stories or something. But yeah, they're great for like all those kind of, you know, old school stories and things.
Yeah, they keep it very much the tradition in there, don't they? It's not like a modern bookshop. It's nice.
Yeah, there is something magical about like Ireland and sort of that Scandinavian.
Yeah, there is.
Scandinavian country.
Well, I suppose there's a
There
real.
definitely is.
Yeah,
I think as well, we kind of grow up. I don't know about like I can't speak for everyone, but like I definitely grew up with like a slight under like superstitions and magic and things like that.
Yeah.
And you know, if you spill salt, you put it over your shoulder, and all of these little things that like other countries don't have. And like even if you take away, say, religious aspects like Ash Wednesday and things like that, that's an idea that I kind of stole for my book. And when they're launching a new ship, if they have any leftover planks, they burn them, make ashes, and then anoint each other with the ash so that they're part of the boat, so that they can feel the sea. And like that's an idea I completely stole from Ash Wednesday. And like I don't think I would have thought of that if I had grown up somewhere that, you know, didn't have that tradition. I wouldn't have thought of putting ashes on your forehead, you know. So although all those little cultural things definitely play into the book as well.
I think as well, because of the close link between, say, the Scandinavia and here through the Vikings and them kind of, you know, settling in Dublin and all that kind of stuff, I think there's probably an element of their history and mythology came here as well. They obviously, you know, Ireland had their own, but that probably interweaves with it as well. So there's kind of this huge resource then, because there are, even from like things I've read, there are such close connections between stories that, say, we have here.
Yeah, like we have different versions of them.
Yeah, compared to what they would have in Norse mythology.
Yeah.
There's real close connections there.
So it's like I said, just said it a few minutes ago, but Scotland also, we have quite similar stories that we've interpreted in different ways. And
Yeah.
I think Scotland's really magical as well. Like I've got into Outlander recently. I don't know if you like read
love
those books.
Outlander.
Yeah.
Like Jamie Fraser, like my boyfriend understands, but like I love that show.
Yeah, so like that has like elements of magic and mythology and time and
That all starts, doesn't it, with the stones?
the stones,
Yeah.
the standing stones
Yeah.
and stuff. Yeah, like there's little
And even if you
connections and
like
things.
flip then to the UK, they don't have, well, from my knowledge anyway, they don't have the same kind of mythology as here. They have things like King Arthur and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
But Stonehenge is very similar to, say, something that you'd have here or in Scotland. There's that kind of myth and kind of magical kind of thing about Stonehenge as well.
yeah, we have Newgrange and like
Yeah.
Portal Dolmens and stuff. They were actually graves, things like that.
The fairy
but-
forts and fairy rings as well, like all these natural stone things. We have like all of these stone monoliths and walls that are like older than, say, like modern America and things, which, you know, it's so steeped in heritage.
Just
Tangents.
the basis of modern stories are like so interesting, you know. There's always a vein of
There's very few things, I think, this is probably going to annoy a lot of people, but there's very few original ideas. There's different interpretations of ideas, which make it an original story, but the actual fundamental core idea of what you're writing about usually is steeped from something that's already been done before.
well,
For a lot of things.
I like, there are, you know, one thing that I read, it was like, if you're trying to come up with a book idea, accept that it's probably already been written and just find your way to tell it. Because if you boil down ideas to like their basic structure, it's probably some sort of good versus evil story, you know.
So, is there a character from your books that you most identify with, and why do you identify with them?
It's hard to give just one, because I think I read a quote during the week that said that authors split up their personalities into different segments and just give them a name, and then that's a character. And I do agree with that, because like Ren's really sarcastic, which she unfortunately got from me, and Kellen has a gambling problem, which I think he also got from me. And Nessa is like, you know, a bit of a people pleaser. So like they all got these different like elements of my own personality, but I think just because she's the main character, probably would have to be Ren. She would be the one that I probably have spent the most time working on and probably associate with the most, especially in Kairos, because she kind of has to go through like a character arc, and she kind of has to come to terms with what she wants and, you know, how she's grown in the last year or two. So I definitely associate her with her more at the end of the book, because she can be a bit bratty as well. But definitely more towards the end of the story, I connect with Ren the most. It's
like they're your children, you know. They're you're like, instead of she got my nose, or it's like she got my gambling addiction, or
It's true, and like it's weird. It's for some people it's hard to, I suppose, kind of explain, but like you do constantly have these kind of characters almost like talking in your head. Like you have their personality alive in you. It's really weird to be trying to explain, and you're kind of trying to put that onto paper, but you sound demented when you're trying to explain to someone, like, yeah, these voices in my head keep telling me things.
Like sometimes when you're writing, I'll have to go back and change a sentence, because I'll be like, oh, he wouldn't say that like that. And I'm like, it's a person that I made up in my head, and I'm correcting myself on how they would say something.
I don't know how authors keep up with like all the characters, because like you said, you'd go back and you'd say, oh, that character wouldn't say that, or it wouldn't say it in that way, or I don't know how you keep up with all the different characters, because I would be so I would just be so confused. I'd be like, it doesn't matter, because I have no idea.
Like, without sounding kind of demented though, it's just they don't seem like characters in my head. They seem like friends that I met years ago. So it's kind of like describing your history teacher, your butcher, and your best friend. Like, even though you might not see them all the time, you'll never forget how they'd say something, or the type of clothes they would wear, or the way they would walk. So I don't really think of them as character profiles with notes in my head. They're just kind of like remembering a friend, or like imagining them in a situation.
Interesting.
It's kind of like they're always living there. They're living inside your head. So
now I'm going to be thinking next time we're like talking, I mean, what character is he talking?
Yeah, it's like sometimes I just find myself, I could be sitting somewhere and just suddenly pop into my head a scene or a part of a plot or something that you're just, you know, you've been trying to work out in your head how to get there. And it's as if like they're talking to you, and it's like, oh, yeah, that would make sense. Maybe I should do this.
Creepy.
It's strange. It's hard to explain. But do you always have a clear vision in your head of what you want your next book to be? Or is it something that's just organic and kind of happens when you write the one you're currently writing?
It's definitely more organic than me sitting down with a structure and making out book 1, book 2, book 3. I didn't necessarily think about Kairos when I was writing Meraki, the first book. It's just, you know, I got about halfway or three-thirds of the way through Meraki and was a bit like, okay, there's another book here, and these are the subplots that I wanted to carry on. So yeah, it isn't an obvious book structure. It's just whatever flows.
Yeah, and I think that seems to be a trend from a lot of people we've spoken to. It's more, as you've written something, you can kind of see how the story can kind of progress. Like, you might have an overall idea of a story and how that might play out over, say, 2 or 3 books, but the actual individual detail doesn't usually happen until you're kind of in the moment writing what you're writing, and like, you probably have scenes that you've written 2 or 3 different ways, and you know, it's only then that it starts to be like, oh, hang on, I quite like how this is going, and maybe this could be something else, and this could then be like, I don't know, a spin-off series. Like I've now created a whole thing that could just be its own thing, and it's kind of just these things spark off.
Like in the opening chapters of Meraki, there's a handmaid who basically walks in with a tray full of food. And when I was writing the character, she was just very minor secondary character. And at the moment, she's grown so much throughout the series that she'll actually be getting her own point of view chapters. You know, she's really grown to become the character's like best friend, and you know, she has such an important role. But like, I hadn't even thought of her name back when I was thinking of Meraki, and she's become so important. So like, it's good to have a structure, but like allow things to happen organically as well, you know.
What would you do?
If you weren't doing what you're doing now, what would you be doing?
Well, I don't think I'd be in prison, hopefully. I did a year of animal care assistance after school, and my mom is a dog groomer and my uncle's a farmer, so probably something with animals. I don't quite know what, but if I wasn't a writer, it'd be something with animals, because that's something I'm really passionate about. I don't know in what aspect though, because when I worked at the vets, I fainted twice. So I'd have to find something like a kitten cuddler or something cuter, but yeah, something like that.
There's kitten cafes now, you never know.
There's true, there is.
They're such a big thing.
Just going back to your writing there, so obviously fantasy, kind of the whole mythology genre is where you mainly write. Is there another genre that you would see yourself maybe dabbling in the future, or?
I think if I was going to do any other genre, it would probably be a branch off of something I already write. So say I have romantic subplots in my books, I might try a more romance heavy story, or a historical fantasy or contemporary fantasy. But I don't think I would ever branch into, say, like sci-fi or something. I think I will probably stay in this world, because I tried writing a short story that was contemporary, and when my characters had phones, I was like, this is too easy. Like, they can just text each other. There's no dramatic horse riding or sailing across the seas. Like, where are the dragons? So I find I'm so used to writing in that type of world. I think I'd find it hard to move to either, you know, a sci-fi based world or a modern based world. But maybe I'll experiment with those in the future.
What is it about the fantasy genre that really brings you in?
It sounds silly, but like, I just get such serotonin from being in a world where they don't have like phones or Wi-Fi or computers or any of the kind of hustle and bustle of our life, and everything seems so much more like primitive, and I just find that really relaxing to write about. And like, I work in like a cosmetic perfume shop at the moment, and like, I love it, I really enjoy it, but like, you're just selling beauty products to people all day and cash registers and everything, and it's just really nice coming home and like putting in your headphones and just going into like a quieter world. And then of course I can have magic and dragons and mermaids. So it's kind of a nice sense of escapism.
Yeah, that's good. I think a lot of kind of other people we've spoken to in the same kind of genre, the fantasy genre, it just definitely seems to be an escapism, you know, a way to kind of maybe even deal with, as you said, like modern society and how fast paced it is. And this is an escape to just something way more calm. And
it is for us reading or watching adaptations as well. I mean, that's why it's a genre in the first place.
Yeah, it's very true.
What advice would you give to someone wanting to start writing?
I remember reading a lot of advice when I first started and like kind of hating it, and always thinking I'd give better advice, but like, it sounds so cliche, but like, you have to start somewhere, and you're never going to write a book by just magically being perfect at it. Like, you have to make peace with the fact that you're going to probably be kind of crappy when you start, but you have to start, and that's the worst you'll be, and you'll get better from there. You know, I think one thing as well that I really wish I had told myself was like, don't take criticism from people you wouldn't take advice from, because sometimes, you know, your great granddad 4 times removed will be like, oh, you're writing a book, here's my inside tips, and you're like, you don't even read. Like, why am I listening to this, you know? So learn to do the polite nod of and then, you know, learn to take advice from those who are in a place to give it. But just start definitely.
Yeah, I think people can give like a lot of bad advice as well. Like you were saying, that's a good rule, because I found it with my art as well. You kind of get a lot of, shall we say, feedback, and it's not necessarily feedback you actually need, because everything is subjective, right? Writing, like reading someone's book is subjective. Looking at someone's art is subjective, because everybody has a particular taste or style. So if someone looked at my art and said, oh no, you know, I don't like your use of colour, for example, well, it's subjective. So I'm not necessarily going to take that advice on board because my style is to use those particular colours. Do you know, it's all kind of open to interpretation.
Yeah. And one thing I suppose you're quite involved in is the whole Bookstagram kind of, I don't know how to explain, like group, I suppose.
Community or cult, whatever way you want.
Yeah. So how have you found that support? I know you were saying obviously people giving advice, and these people are obviously a lot of them in the same position, self-published or authors, or even published through traditional means. But how have you found having them?
I think the whole Bookstagram universe has been probably the biggest aid in my self-published journey. Like I met my cover designers through Bookstagram, my formatters, all of my beta readers, or people who, you know, help with reviews and stuff, all through Bookstagram. So they have probably been the biggest support that I've had. Of course, you're going to get one or two people, you know, criticizing or, you know, negative reviews, but like that's just normal. That's a balance thing. But the support has been phenomenal. I have a few traditional published friends on there, but yeah, a solid 80% would all be indie publishers. So it's a great way to kind of bounce ideas off each other, and you know, what works, what doesn't work. Kate and Shauna, who I think you know as well, they're amazing for telling you what potholes to avoid, because you do fall into them yourself, and while you're in there you just shout out, don't come down here to each other, you know. So they tell you what to avoid, which is great. So yeah, they've all been remarkably helpful.
And
how do you, nice to have support in your field.
It's definitely, and I've definitely noticed that community are very supportive, which is obviously really nice. But how do you deal actually with negative feedback that you're saying? Sometimes you get obviously the negative reviews. It's kind of part and parcel of the whole process. But how do you deal with them? I try. It's hard because you want to immediately be like, no, but you don't understand the chapter. Let me explain it to you. But you can't do that. What I try to do, like what you were saying with your art, you know, if they're criticizing your use of colors or your use of language, that's your style. You can't change that for one person's opinion. If someone says it once, it's probably an opinion. If you see it 5 or 6 times, it's probably a pattern that you might need to just look at. And it is, at the time, it might sting a little bit, or you might get a bit like, well, but if you read it and it offends you a little bit, maybe it's because there's a reason. So a lot of people were so lovely with Meraki, but I got like 1 or 2 comments just being like, it's fine, but the fast pacedness of it made it feel a bit short. Which, looking back, they probably did have a point. You know, it isn't the longest book that's ever existed. So with Kairos then, it really encouraged me to kind of slow down every once in a while and give the characters, you know, those meaningful, touching moments, and, you know, add another chapter or 2 and things like that. So it definitely did. Even though at the time I was a bit annoyed, it definitely did, you know, it was constructive feedback, which is important, because if it's a personal attack, you need to block it, move on, it's a troll. But if it's genuine feedback and they say it in a really loving, caring way, they're probably just trying to help you.
Hi, highs and lows.
So what has been your biggest high in your writing career so far, and what's been, say, we won't say low, maybe a learning curve?
One thing which I read a lot when I decided to self-publish was that you'll never sell like in the real world, that you'll only be online. And I managed to get my books into the Dublin libraries, which like felt like a real thing, you know. And I loved that. That was such a great feeling. And I actually emailed them being like, I'll give them to you for free, like just put them on the shelf. And they were like, no, like we'll buy them properly. And I was like, oh my God, they're buying my book. So that was like a proper like, oh, I'm a real author moment, you know. And then like yesterday said like there was like a little newspaper article about me and stuff like that. So I think sometimes because I'm an indie author and it's all online and all on my computer, it feels very bubble. But when I see stuff about it in the real world, then that feels like amazing. So those are definitely the high moments.
And what would you say would be your biggest learning curve then that you've experienced?
My biggest learning curve. Oh, like you're never going to be finished editing, but like always try again would be my thing, because I was when my first book, Travel Obsidian, I was so excited to get it, and I opened it like in the middle page to like flick through it, and the first thing I saw was a typo, and like I just closed it for a second and put it down and was like, oh my gosh, like why out of all the pages did I land on the typo? Now, it's not a huge deal. The thing with self-publishing is that you have full control over the book. So if you do make a mistake, you can open up the file, fix it, and re-upload it. It just means that anyone bought it before you uploaded it will have, say, like the old version, and then you have the new one. So you have the chance to fix them, but like you don't want to be doing that. You know, you want it to be perfect straight out the gate. So yeah, edit more than you think, and don't trust your own eyes. You need beta readers. You need people that don't know you, because your mom's always going to think it's good. You need to reach out to the people that you think might be a tough critic and offer it to them as well. And it's always better to get the harsh feedback at the start, fix it, and then release it, rather than trying to fix it after.
Yeah, I think that's the other good thing as well, being an indie author, is you kind of have control over the time frames of when you're going to release them. So you're not under pressure to just get it out because you're under a strict deadline. You have that time to make sure that they are as best as they can be.
Yeah, like if you haven't announced your date, you can edit it like for another 6 months if you want to. You know, there's no external pressure, which is a blessing and a curse, because it makes some people too relaxed and they'll never release. And then some people are like, yeah, it's done. And they might release it in like a week. And you're like, no. So there's a happy medium there.
Definitely. So what would you see as one of the biggest challenges when it comes to writing?
I think writing on the days where you don't want to. Like, you should never force yourself to write, because, you know, creativity is something that kind of does ebb and flow. And if you're not feeling it on that day, just, you know, take a day off. But you won't always have inspiration or motivation. And I found, like, I always try to do, you know, the NaNoWriMo, the novel in a month challenges. I always try to do them, and like trying to write set amount of words on set amount of days, I really struggle with. But doing exercises like that really do help, just getting it out there. And you know, if you start writing, even if the first 200 words are terrible, you might write one paragraph that's great, you know. But that's something I think writers need to be kind of good at, is like pushing themselves to work through the slower days, or the days where you can't think about how someone would sit in a chair and you're like, why is the sentence so hard to write? The kind of boring bits, just keep working at those, because you know they all add up. Every sentence that you write that's gold in a whole pile of crap is still worth it.
I've seen those challenges, and I don't know where I'd even begin to be under that kind of strict pressure. I don't know.
It's tough.
Maybe you should do something like that. Stuff like that gives you a little
kick
boost.
up the bum.
Yeah,
like
I love the way I was like boosting. You were like, kick up the bum.
I'm terrible. Like I'll have an idea, and then I'll have a day where well, obviously, like I don't get a lot of time during the day, but if I have some time to write, I kind of go off and I'll write, and I might write, 3,000 words and be like, okay, brilliant, I've written loads. And then I might not write for like another 3 weeks.
Yeah, but in fairness, we do have a lot going on.
Yeah, we do.
Like, we're doing a podcast. I have a business. You have a day job. We have a toddler.
Yeah,
we have a house that needs to be like cleaned and maintained.
Yeah. There is a lot
I love how
to
you're like,
eat.
do the challenges, but still clean.
Yeah. Don't worry about your actual book you're trying to write. Just do one of these challenges. Yeah, I don't know.
So I'd like to do a challenge, but don't be too hard on yourself at the same time.
I don't know. I just find it. Sometimes I find it, as you were saying, like, I don't know how to word it. If I felt like I had to sit there every day and write, I don't think I'd enjoy it the way that I enjoy it when I do write. And also, I don't think what I would write would be as good as it could be as it would be if I did it when I want to. That sounded very complicated.
I do understand. Yeah, like the thing I would say about those challenges is you're not going to have a novel by the end of the month. In my personal experience, some people do, and I'm like, how? But I found that I never have a kind of ready to go novel at the end of the month. I have a solid outline with some decent ideas, but because I'm kind of forcing myself to write, sometimes I'm writing a scene being like, this is going to be cut the second this month is over because it's terrible. And I'm only writing it to hit, my 500 words a day. But like, I might just write, something about the wind going through the trees a certain way and be like, okay, I can save that one sentence, or I can save this one line. Yeah. But those challenges don't work for everyone. I just find them good for forcing me to sit down and like turn my brain on and go back to my world, because I do have a habit of having a great idea, writing it down and being like, pat on the back, that was great, and then taking 5 days off.
Yeah. Oh no, that's me.
Shane does that, but
me.
Instead of 5 days off, it'd be like 5
weeks.
months off.
Yeah.
Maybe a challenge would help you like edit and think more and like go back and take what you were saying, like take that section, use
like
that section and rewrite that section.
Yeah, I have notebooks and stuff like that I always jot down ideas and whatnot in. And like I wrote, I'd say 95% of a novel, and then I just put it to one side and I haven't gone back to it, and I started a whole new thing, and that's what I've kind of been working on. But I don't know, I do take an awful long time. I'm like George R.R. Martin. I take years to write anything because I have to be in a certain mindset, and I can't force myself to be in that mindset. I just have to get up that day and be like, oh, today is a day that I'm going to write something.
Yeah. That's okay though.
I find it very difficult otherwise.
I mean, it's not your day job.
No, it's not. No.
It's okay.
I did see an author at like a writing event who had a t-shirt on, and he was like, creativity is like a fart. If you have to push it, it's probably crap. And I just think about that all the time.
That's hilarious.
That's a brilliant t-shirt.
That's really
It's such a good one.
Yeah, that's really good.
I want that t-shirt. So what's coming next for you? Like, what should we be looking out for?
So I have a little spin-off novella that I'm working on at the moment, which is still based in the Siren Story world, but it's not from the characters that we know at the moment. It's from that handmaid that I told you about who became a really big person. So the story that I'm working on at the moment is from Nessa's point of view, and during Kairos, she's given a whole new task, and it's her journey on this new task and her life and how everything peters out for her. And then I have another side project like that's been on the shelf for a while now, but it's a Trial by Obsidian sequel, which is called Tribulation. I announced the title and everything, and I had great hopes and dreams to have it out like a year ago, and then I had this idea for a mermaid story that just took over my writing calendar. And the thing is, people are like, well, why didn't you just write that one first and then write the mermaid one? And I was like, when you get an idea for a story though, like it takes up so much space in my brain that like I couldn't even remember my other characters' names. Like it's all I could think about was this mermaid story, and I had to get it out, and I got it out by writing it down, and then that became a book. So I will go back to my other series eventually, but at the moment it's all the mermaid world.
Yeah, I completely relate to that. 100%. Like when you get that idea, you just have to stick with it. There's no point flicking between ideas. You have to just go with the one that's there. That's why there's so many authors that have multiple things on the go, and I don't know how you can flick from one kind of story to another without confusing things. I don't know. I find it very difficult.
I feel like I'd start to lose like my characters' voices if I flitted between the two. I'd be afraid that they'd start thinking the same or sounding the same, which I don't want, so I'd rather just park one up, work on one, finish one, and then go back rather than writing them at the same time, because I wouldn't be able. They're also in different tenses, which I know would be an editing nightmare because I would just mess up all the time.
Yeah, that would be tough.
Share the spotlight.
So are there other authors or writers or just people that you think that deserve a shout out and that we should look out for?
Definitely. So Shauna Richmond, who writes the Ragnall Chronicles and the Odin books, they're amazing. They're fantasy as well. She's like Ireland's answer to George R. R. Martin. Like, big shout out to her. Kate Callahan, who released her Crown of Trader book that was re-released this month as well. That's great. It's all about the daughter of hell, so very exciting. And then a Welsh author who's Estelle Grace Tudor. She writes middle grade books, which are basically like about a girl who is like in charge of the fairy world, and it's great. They're like Harry Potter meets Narnia, so they're great for kind of like slightly older kids or younger teens. And they're really like fairy tale feeling and whimsical and very heartwarming. So those three girls have like been so supportive. They're always my beta readers, and they share every post I put up. And we have a running joke that like if we get a bad review, we send it into the group and we're like, excuse me, what's this? And we like help each other, our spirits pick up and everything. So yeah, I don't know if I would keep writing if it wasn't for
Oh, that's
nice.
really nice.
Yeah, it's nice to have that support. Definitely. So do you want to tell people then where they can find you and your work?
So they can find me on the Bookstagram community cult at Naomi Kelly Writing, and then my books are available through Kindle and Kindle Unlimited, where you can get them for free, and then the paperbacks you can get from Amazon, Book Depository, or if you're in Dublin you can get them in the libraries as well.
Brilliant.
Thank you so
Okay,
much.
thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, it was great fun. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the I-Endeavour podcast.
Join us next week for another episode. You can find us on YouTube or your favourite podcasting app, or on Instagram.
And if you're a creator or a small business that would like to take part in Series 2, email podcast@idyllicendeavour.com.
And don't forget to like and subscribe to make sure you see all future episodes.